Hello everybody, this is Yoko's Anime Reactions, and I'm about to record uh, for a book reading. I had to think for a second. God, I'm sleepy. Anyway, this book you guys have not seen yet. I don't think it has an anime yet. I hope it kind of does at some point because it's another isekai, kind of like Ascendance of a Bookworm, where the main character is reincarnated into another body that already exists and has a family and everything. Here is the book, The Magician Who Rose from Failure. So let us get started on this. The prologue. That night, Arcus Wraitheft, son to the Viscount, had a peculiar dream. He dreamed of the life of a certain man, who lived in a world unlike any Arcus had ever seen. Unlike Arcus, this man was born to an ordinary family and lived an ordinary life. During his teens and early 20s, he dedicated his life to studying before dying suddenly in an accident. That sucks. In a way, it was like Arcus lived that man's life through his dream. He learned of that world's history and culture with that man at school. He learned of an art named science, something which didn't exist in Arcus' world, because this is a fantasy world. He won competitions, made friends, fell in love. The majority of Arcus' dreams were vague and nonsensical, yet this dream in particular was so vivid and real it almost seemed entangled with reality itself. It even made Arcus wonder if the life he had accepted as reality was in fact a dream, and the man he thought he dreamed of was his true self. Perhaps Arcus didn't truly exist, and his entire life was nothing but a dream this man saw in his final moments. The only thing that was certain was that this long dream had a profound effect on Arcus. He could barely believe that he had woken up in that the bed he woke up in was really his. It was as if the man he dreamed of had stolen his entire sense of identity. They did say that people were shaped by their experiences. Perhaps the same could be said for dreams, or perhaps not. But through that vision, Arcus had matured and grown to think like an adult, despite his young age of 6. What affected him most was the loss of that man's lover just before their wedding. Ooh, that is no fun. Arcus found himself weeping at the very thought of it, just as if it was his own lover that he had lost. There was no doubt that man was now a part of Arcus. That day, Arcus broke into a fever. His dream was only one of the factors that caused it. His temperature shot up and his condition deteriorated rapidly. It reminded him of when the man in his final dream was suffering from the flu. As Arcus lay in bed, he was visited by a couple. The man's hair was silver, while the woman had brown hair, a much more common color in this world. Arcus was extremely familiar with the pair. They were his parents, Joshua and Celine Wraitheft. Mother, father, Arcus croaked. Even in his current state, he wanted to call for his parents. He wanted them to save him. The expressions on their faces as they looked at him instantly twisted. The child certainly puts up a fight, remarked his mother, as though Arcus were a worm she had just spotted on the ground. His father grunted in agreement. Despite Arcus's fever, his parents' gaze sent a chill through his spine as memories began to resurface. Arcus lacked a talent for magic, and so he had been denied his position as the Wraitheft heir. Ooh, that is no fun. Being in a world of magic and all that, and not being able to cast it, that must suck. This is a story of how Arcus Wraitheft, a 6-year-old boy, began to work his way back to the top with another man's memories. Part 1, The Disinherited Boy. I actually started reading this the other day and got to this point just now. Arcus stared out of the window and sighed for the umpteenth time. The window looked out on the Wraithefts' well-kept garden, trees, and a great number of stone houses. In terms of civilization and culture, Arcus' world was much like the medieval Europe of the man's world. Unlike that man's world, the buildings here were not made of reinforced concrete, but stones and wood. Needless to say, motor vehicles were also non-existent. Most people traveled by horse and carriage. Televisions, gas cookers, air conditioning, refrigerators, none of those things existed in Arcus's world. They did, however, have lighting, water, and sewage systems, which was something. Not that those things comforted Arcus, who had experienced the wonders of the other world through his dream, but that wasn't why he was sighing so much anyway. His anguish rose from the conditions of his state. Even after his fever went down, his parents treated him just as poorly as ever. Before Arcus's magical abilities were tested, his parents regarded him and his younger sister like there was nothing dearer to them in the world. Now Arcus was treated like dirt, and I am no longer the heir. It had only been a short time before Arcus dreamed of the other world that he was barred from his inheritance. It all came down to magic and the weight he carried in this world. In that man's world, magic belonged to fiction and quackery. Here, it really existed. The raid thefts only held a viscountcy, whatever, however you pronounce it, among the gentry, but it was a position they'd maintained since the ascension of the first king. They were a military family, and it was the founder's use of magic on the battlefield that earned him a position of nobility, beginning the raid theft line. Blech! Cannot talk. The House of Standing could not survive an heir weak in the arts. When Arcus's mother was assessed by the family a few weeks ago, when Arcus's Aether was assessed by the family a few weeks ago, he failed to achieve even an average score. The test was simple. The examinee was asked to use magic to create ripples through the surface of a large pond, and scored on how long they could sustain the effort. Most raid thefts could go for an hour or more. Arcus, however, didn't even last 3 minutes. Ever since then, his parents looked at and spoke to him like he was pure filth. They called him a disgrace, talentless, and sometimes even a mutt. It was an abhorrent way to treat a 6-year-old. In her more enraged moments, his mother even struck him. Arcus had tried desperately to improve his magic skills ever since. If he could do that much, then maybe his parents would return to the loving mother and father he used to know. Arcus had torn the family's library apart looking for some way to increase his magical power. He even asked the servants if they knew how. In the end, it seemed it was impossible after all. And even when his parents learned of his efforts, their attitude towards him did not change. That was how Arcus ended up bedridden with a fever. He thought back to his mother's words. "It's as though she wished me dead," he murmured glumly. They upset him, of course, but what he felt lately was a pain that stayed with him and weighed on him in a way grief didn't. Those words of hers made him worry about the future. Would they really carry on looking after him here at the estate? Were they planning to throw him out onto the street now that he survived his fever? Either way, Arcus considered his dreams of that man to be a great blessing. He had matured through that dream. And now the prospect of being abandoned by his parents didn't seem as scary as it may have in the past. That wasn't to say the idea filled him with joy either, but he realized that there was no point now in trying to win back their love. Yeah, no point in that, because you really wouldn't want it even if you did, because you would still be haunted by how they treated you before. The damage would have been done. As he gazed at the gloomy sky outside his window, there was a knock at the door. "Brother!" Licia Raytheft, Arcus's sister, entered without waiting for a reply. She was an adorable child, her hair as silver as Arcus's. Bound up in a ponytail, she marched up to her brother. "Play with me," she demanded. "If you want me to, I will," Arcus replied. "But are you sure it's okay?" "Okay." Okay?" his sister echoed. "Surely mother and father have told you to stay away from me." "Uh-huh. Mother told me not to go near you," Licia announced proudly. Arcus wasn't surprised in the least, though he hadn't expected Licia's rebellious streak. "I just want to play with you," Licia repeated. "All right," Arcus replied, getting to his feet. He enjoyed playing with his little sister. He hoped that this wouldn't end up being the last time. He knew better than to expect anything, since he was no longer the heir to the raid theft estate. His sister would replace him, especially since she had far outperformed Arcus in the magic test. Celine had come to hate the idea that Licia should associate with Arcus and would take any opportunity she could to badmouth him in front of his sister. Licia still seemed to adore him at the moment, but there was no telling what could change with time under his parents' education. Licia. Arcus studied his younger sister as she smiled at him sweetly. They weren't actually brother and sister, but cousins. Oh, that's interesting. While Joshua Wraitheft, the head of the family, was Arcus's father, Licia was the daughter of Joshua's brother, the late Douglas Wraitheft. Arcus's memory of their first meeting was vague, but he recalled that Licia was introduced to him as his cousin. When her father was killed the following year in a war with a neighboring nation, Joshua took Licia in. Arcus and Licia were brought up together as siblings of the same age. His parents were probably relieved now that they had done so, but Arcus himself wasn't sure how he felt about it. "What's wrong?" Licia suddenly asked. "Nothing," Arcus reassured her. "What did you want to play today?" And so Arcus ended up spending the majority of the day playing with Licia. The next day he was called into Celine's room to be disciplined. "I thought I told you to stay away from Licia." Celine's shrieks pierced Arcus's ears as she stood above him. So long as Celine caught wind of it, Arcus knew he could expect this treatment every time he and Licia crossed paths from now on. There was nothing he could do in response but shrink back and apologize. "I'm sorry, Mother." Sorry isn't going to cut it. If your worthlessness rubs off on her, what then? Would you try to fix that with apology too? Arcus knew full well that worthlessness, as she put it, wasn't contagious, but he barely finished the thought before he felt a sharp impact against his cheek. Despair and frustration at his helplessness welled up inside him. I'm sorry." "Listen, you filthy mutt. I'm warning you now. Stay away from Licia." She gave him a drawn-out beating. Arcus bit his lip as hard as he could, trying to bear the pain. "Why did God curse me with a waste of space like you? Why couldn't you be more like the Lazrael hair? He's overflowing with magic power." Pulling out a handkerchief, Celine began to dab at her eyes dramatically, like she was suffering most of all. She barely finished her act before she was back to screaming again. "Next time you do something like this, don't even think that I won't use my magic on you." "Yes, Mother." Finally free of his mother's wrath, Arcus left the room. On his way back to his bedroom, he heard the servants whispering. "There he is, the Wraitheft failure of a son. Look at his face. His mother's punishment made him cry. To think he was born to the Viscount, and yet his magic skills are so pathetic. He's a disgrace to the family. I don't understand why they haven't gotten rid of him yet. I wonder what he's going to do to rise up with all this, because apparently he does. I just don't know how. Is he going to use science? That'd be cool." Without magical talent, he found himself beneath even their concerns. He took solace in the fact that not every servant participated in this harmful gossip. It was only those who knew how to use magic themselves, those who didn't sympathize with him. After finally returning to his room, Arcus closed the door. His legs trembled like all the tension holding him up had drained from his body. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. It didn't matter. Arcus knew that. He had experienced over 20 years of another man's life. Being hated and hit by his own mother wasn't a big deal at all. It didn't affect him. There was no reason for him to feel anything at all. He only had to think of his parents as his mother and father in name only. Arcus's true mother was the gentlewoman who raised the man in his dream. As long as he believed that, he had no reason to break down here. He had no need to be jealous in the least. A sob escaped his throat. Soon his eyes were burning. There was no stopping now. Something snapping inside him. Arcus began to bawl. Why did his parents treat him so cruelly when less than a month ago they treated him so tenderly? They would stroke his head and hold him tightly. Even if he whined, they would smile without scolding him for it. Now they saw him as dead weight. Was this really how his mother was going to treat the son she carried for 9 months? Perhaps it was right to shout at your child just because they were talentless. Maybe it was normal to hit them and treat them roughly. Oh God, no, he's starting to think like that. That's not good. Arcus had lived another man's life now. He wasn't the same boy he was before, and yet he found he was powerless to resist the emotions the man had endured. But why? He saw countless hardships through that man's eyes. He was bullied through elementary school, which led him to become the class clown until college, where could finally spend his days as he wanted. That entire time he carried on. The man's life had taught Arcus how to stand strong. Why couldn't he stand strong now? Arcus howled, the emotions he could no longer hold back, streaming down his face as tears. When his throat dried and his tears stopped, he stayed curled up against his bedroom door. He didn't know how long he stayed there like that. Before he knew it, the sun disappeared and the view outside the window darkened. Opening the door behind him, he found a trolley laden with the meal. A servant who sympathized with him must have left it there. His stomach empty from crying, Arcus couldn't hold back his appetite. Magic, he murmured to himself as he dipped a slice of bread into the cold soup. Magic. Magic was the reason he was in this mess. It was because he lacked magic ability that he was removed from the position of heir. It was because he lacked magic ability that his parents' love for him ran dry. A thought flashed in his mind. If he became a magician more powerful than anybody had ever seen, he could show his parents that they were wrong. Easier said than done. You don't have a whole lot of magic. How are you going to do this? Is the question. Arcus bit off a clump of bread. He knew it was a childish thought, but the idea appealed to him. There was something else, too. I miss hamburgers. Could you really blame him? He has to have... The man that he's been dreaming of has got to be a part of him now, because he has probably never tasted hamburgers before. The truth was, while it was far from enough to satisfy his parents, Arcus actually possessed a fraction more ability than the average magician. He could use some level of magic, but it wasn't like he was destined to become the greatest magician the world has ever seen either. If he put the work in, there was a chance he could be able to find some way to increase his aether. He had failed before, but that was when he was a normal 6-year-old. If he could bend his new memories of the other world and its technological wonders to his advantage, then the results might be different this time around. If he could actually use science to pull this off, that'd be cool. His determination renewed, Arcus set to work rereading all his family's grimoires. Magic is the power to bring all sorts of phenomena to life, using mystical words to create spells. That was probably the simplest way to sum up what magic was in this world. Based on this definition alone, the magic of this world seemed to be less limited than the magic described in the books Arcus knew from the man's world. All you needed was to put certain words together and you could make all sorts of things happen. As long as you could create a spell, countless possibilities lay before you. When the book spoke of mystical words, they weren't referring to a modern language, but to the elder tongue, whose roots were the very origin of society. It was written in characters known as art glyphs, which look similar to astrological and zodiac symbols from the man's world. Each word of this language held power related to its meaning, and assembling these words into a sentence or phrase would create a spell waiting to be used. What happened as a result of these words largely depended on the magician's intentions, but as long as you memorized the elder tongue, in theory, you could use magic to do almost anything. The book went on to describe that to use the language you had to put an appropriate amount of magical power into each word. If you got the amount wrong, the spell would fail. In other words, the idea of overcooking a spell or overclocking a spell was mere fantasy. Not that it really mattered to Arcus, who wouldn't have enough aether for that in the first place. The amount of aether you possessed determined a sorcerer's staying power. To sum it up, Arcus needed to learn the right words and how to arrange them into spells, that or knowledge of extant spells, and how much magical power to put into each word. Alongside his studies of the language they spoke at home, Arcus had also been learning the elder tongue, and so he already had a decent understanding of it. When casting a spell, it was important to picture your intentions vividly. Thanks to that man's memories, Arcus now had a whole host of imagery that he could draw on. Things he witnessed in real life and in films, comics, and cartoons. What's left now is aether and spells, he murmured to himself. In preparation for the test he had taken, Arcus studied how to control his aether to a certain extent, so that wouldn't really be an issue. In terms of spells, he just had to learn those that already existed, how to make his own, and how much power was consumed upon casting them. On that front, he was at ease. He'd read the book bled the book dry. It wasn't worth considering asking his parents and the magic users among the servants likely wouldn't help him either. At this point, Arcus would have been well within his rights to give up. I'll make this work. The truth was, he had someone in mind who he thought might be willing to help him out. A few days after Arcus gathered his resolve to become a magician, the Wraith Thefts received a visit. Brother. Hey Joshua, been a while, huh? In the Wraith Thefts' drawing room stood Arcus's father, Joshua, and a man who looked much like him, with the same silvery hair. Unlike Joshua, this man had much more of a working-class air about him. His muscular body, browned from the sun, had a few burn marks here and there that spoke of his return from the battlefield. His name was Crabe Abend, and he was Joshua's elder brother, though he had descended from the Wraith Theft estate years ago, or abscended from the Wraith Theft estate years ago. The reason for his defecation was to do with his aether. When it came to choosing an heir for the Wraith Theft name, Joshua had been chosen simply because he had more aether than his brother. Cabe quarreled with Arcus's grandfather about it, which eventually led to his decision to leave. He could still show his face to the head of the Wraith Theft estate and still be considered that man's brother for one reason. Crabe had studied and worked incredibly hard in exile. When he came back to fight in the war, he achieved success after success, eventually receiving an important office within the military from the king. His true strength ended up far exceeding his brother's talent in the arts. As a baron, Joshua still outranked Crabe among the gentry, but within the military, their roles were reversed. Crabe didn't associate much with the Wraith Thefts, but he dropped by when he was moving between military posts just to check in on his family. Hey Arcus, how you doing? Crabe grinned as he spotted his nephew. I am well, thank you. It's been a long time. I'm glad to see you're well too, Arcus replied. Since when did you speak so much like a grown-up, huh? Is that what they're teaching you in those fancy air classes? Crabe let out a hearty laugh, apparently overjoyed to see his nephew maturing so fast. Oh, he doesn't know. What's he gonna do? Arcus's uncle was always so open and straightforward. Arcus found him very approachable. Joshua, however, did not look so pleased. Arcus is no longer the heir to the Wraith Theft estate. There was a pause. What? Crabe's eyes widened in surprise. His aether is far too low for our standards. Lycia shall be taking his position as heir, Joshua explained. Lycia, who was sitting next to her father, shot an anxious glance at Arcus. He couldn't blame her. She was put in an extremely awkward position. Suddenly Crabe narrowed his eyes. Don't tell me that's why you ain't letting him sit on the couch. That is indeed why, came the response. I want to smack his parents. So much. Just from what I've read so far. Arcus alone was being made to stand behind the rest of the family as they sat, on Joshua's orders. Though his father was treating Arcus like a servant, he likely saw him as even less than that. Crabe's expression crumbled into a frown. Look, even if he ain't got that much power, don't you think it's kinda early to be making that decision? He can still have potential, you know. Please, Joshua scoffed. You should know more than anybody that aether doesn't increase over time. Doesn't matter. He could still go the same way that Crabe did and go into the military and get all that. Crabe let out an exaggerated sigh before turning his frustrated gaze back towards Joshua. You remember what Dad said to us before he died, right? It seemed he struck a nerve. Things are different now, Joshua protested. The fact is, the boy simply hasn't enough aether to be worthy to leave the house. Hey, that boy is your son. At least treat him like your own flesh and blood, Crabe shouted, raising his voice to a level above Joshua's. He is no longer the heir, therefore he is no longer my son. The moment his lack of power was established, he became a worthless Ooh, Crabe is probably gonna smack this guy for that. It was like a frigid wind swept through the room. Arcus nearly shivered. Joshua swallowed, clearly panicked, and Arcus put together that Crabe's anger was the source of that tension. Oh boy, I can't wait to see this. I want to see this animated. I can't believe you're saying this in front of your own son, Crabe muttered darkly. Why shouldn't I? Such a talentless creature is of no use to the House of Wraith Theft. So you ended up like a piece of crap dad after all, Crabe spat. He wasn't just looking at Joshua now either, but Celine too. Having played her own part in disowning Arcus, she cast her gaze away, neither of them able to look him in the eye, and the servant shivering behind them. Crabe started to calm. He turned to look at Arcus sympathetically. Come on, the kid's only 6 years old. We are a family known for our military prowess. If we must cast a member out to protect the family, we should not hesitate. You're gonna say that in front of him, too. You must be crazy, Crabe said, exasperated. This was Arcus' chance. Uncle, he began. Uncle, I have a favor to ask of you. What's up? I would like you to teach me about magic. Arcus, you little... Oh, that was Joshua saying that. Joshua scowled at his son. Arcus met his gaze head on. There was nothing to be scared of anymore. He let out all the tears he could spare days ago. His parents could glare at him and hit him all they liked, but he swore he would never let them make him cry ever again. From now on, he was prepared to stand up against them. Crabe stared at Arcus, taken aback by his words. Are you sure, Arcus? Yes, I am sure. He was doing the right thing. In fact, this was all he could do. In getting so angry on his behalf, Crabe proved Arcus could trust him. Arcus nodded, watching as the confusion in Crabe's eyes turned to admiration. It didn't take long for Joshua to interject. Stop right there, he shouted. How dare you ridicule the name of Wraith Death like this? This is not my intention. In fact, I am doing this for the family. Arcus's unexpected words and nonchalant tone merely provoked Joshua's rage further. What utter nonsense. If I prove that I have talent, then there should be no reason for the family to be ashamed of me. Am I wrong? Arcus was doing his very best to take a dig at Joshua. That he was doing so in front of Crabe, who had already proven himself worthy, made his words all the more effective. Just as Arcus expected, the venom in his father's gaze increased. In terms of his position within the family, Arcus could fall no lower, and so there was no way to make him regret this. He no longer cared how much his father came to hate him. Why, Joshua began, but Crabe interrupted him with a hearty laugh. Come on, Joshua, it's too early to decide he's gonna shame the family. Or are you saying I showed you and Dad up just 'cause I made something out of my life? Brother. Joshua's face turned red as hot iron at Crabe's barb. Crabe stuck his tongue out at his brother as he raged. Okay, Arcus, I'll teach you. You'll be a fine magician once I'm done with you. Yay! And that was how Arcus's uncle, Crabe Abend, became his magic teacher. Yay! Someone cares about him! The following day, Crabe took Arcus to his home in the royal capital. There in the garden, he began a magical demonstration. Crabe stood in front of Arcus, a bandana wrapped around his silver hair, and his military jacket hung over his short-sleeved shirt. Sorry. His tanned, muscular arms were folded in front of his chest. He looked much more like a fighter than any sort of magician, but despite his appearance, he was known across the land as a scholar of magic. Not that he wasn't also a fine man-at-arms. First, I want to see how much you already know, Crabe began. Yes, sir. You got spunk. I like it, Crabe grinned. Right, I'm determined to show Mother and Father that they misjudged me, Arcus declared. Now that's what I'm talking about. Crabe let out a hearty laugh. Now, how much of the basics of magic do you know? According to my readings, to use magic you need to know both art glyphs and the Elder Tongue. You use those to create a spell, which you then recite and imbue with your magic power. Yep, you hit the nail on the head. Now what do you need to learn art glyphs and their language? A dictionary, Arcus replied. That's enough to brush up on them, Crabe agreed, but just that won't do if you're serious about becoming a magician. Really? Yeah. Arcus was shocked. All he used in his studies at home was a dictionary, and so he thought that would be enough. He was starting to realize that his knowledge of magic still barely scratched the surface of what there was to learn. You'll be needing one of these. Putting his hand into a bag he'd come prepared with, Crabe pulled out one of the thickest books Arcus had ever seen. Arcus gawked at it. These are the ancient chronicles. The birth of heaven and earth documents the creation of the earth and sky. The spiritual age is a record of the time when spirits wandered earth. The prophecy of shadows predicts the entire history and future of this world. Documenting the stars describes a scholar's life as he follows the sky and the movements of the planets. The magicians... Dang it, what is that word? I gotta move forward. Elegy speaks about civilization as it was when magic flourished, and then there's demons and society's collapse. That one's about the four powerful demons who will come and destroy the world. It's got the Song of Destruction in it. They say the entirety of the Elder Tongue is recorded in these 6 titles, but Arcus prompted. No one actually knows if every last word is written in them. There's no one who can actually read them all anyway, Craig explained. Not even you? Not even me. Especially the Prophecy of Shadows. Craig grinned. I have no clue what the author's on about. So these are the 6 books you should use to study the language of the ancient arts, Arcus asked. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop. And I hope you guys enjoyed this and are excited for more, and I'll see you guys next time.